Good afternoon, everyone. Softer. Yes. Good afternoon. We will start now the roundtable discussion on the South China Sea issues and EDCA and other issues. This is a roundtable discussion with the South China Sea Probing Initiative Delegation, SCSPI. I'd like to introduce our special guests from abroad, top intellectuals who are with us to discuss all issues frankly, intellectually. I will introduce them before they give their opening remarks. Professor Hubo. Yes, Professor Hubo is from Peking University, a professor of the School of International Studies, also director of South China Strategic Situation Probative, SCSPI. Later on, I'll call each one to speak. Dr. Yang Yan, yes, she is Vice Director of the South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative. Also educated from London School of Economics, University of Hong Kong, also National Institute for South China Sea Studies. Dr. Xiaolu, beside me, she is Vice Director of the South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative, SCSPI. She is Nanyang Technology University of Singapore visiting scholar, associate professor, and assistant dean of the China Institute of Boundary and Ocean Studies, Wuhan University. Last but not the least, Dr. Zhihua, associate professor and head of East Asia Marine Policy Project, Center for Japanese Studies, Shanghai Jiaotong University. These are our four guests. Later on, I'll introduce the local participants here. Let's invite first, maybe I'll just mention the guests who are here now, and then we'll proceed. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of a very legendary General Victor Corpus here. His life has been made into famous movies in the Philippines. And former chief of the intelligence service of the armed forces of the Philippines before, and a top defense analyst of the Philippines. We have also, of course, Professor Dr. Romel Banlawi, chairman of BOT, New Era University Chinese Studies Program, past president of the Philippine Association for Chinese Studies, and many other think tanks and institute, top geopolitics analyst. With him is Mr. Mark Go, Vice President of Philippine-China Friendship Society over there. Mr. Herman Laurel, President of Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies Institute, and also Dr. Melissa Loha, international law expert. And we have with us Mr. Rodrigo Capunan, a columnist of Manila Standard newspaper, also an analyst. And also we have Rodolfo Habeliana Jr., representing consumers and commuters, United Filipino Consumers and Commuters, and others. My name is Wilson Lee Flores. I will act as your moderator. Let us invite our four guests. I have missed some people, sorry. Mr. Peter Labinya, chairman of the, he's from Davao, a civic leader. He's the chairman of the Philippine-China Mutual Cooperation Society in PCM-CSI, Mr. Peter Labinya. And Mr. Ado Paglinawan, book author and analyst, former diplomat of the Philippines in Washington, D.C., and Vice President for External Affairs, Asian Century Philippines Institute. Who else did I miss? Sorry. Did I miss someone? If I miss someone, please point out. Let's proceed now. We'd like to invite our four speakers to give your opening statement first. Then we'll go to the discussion. Or do you want to answer questions now? Can you give an opening statement, each one of you, even short? Very short. Yes, short. Anything that, and then we could open the floor for question and answer. Professor Hu Bo, Director of the South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative from Peking University.
Thank you, Wilson. Thank you, and good afternoon. And nice to see so many Philippine friends, old friends and new friends today. Actually, it is our second time of SSPI to come to Manila. We have been to Manila 2020 in January, just before the pandemic outbreak. So we are lucky enough. So today is we have been to Manila 2 days before, and we have talked about South China's issue. Actually, a little tired about this issue, but today we also would like to hear your views and points on this, as well, and share our perspective, our points in the Chinese perspective on this issue. We would like to be very frankly and candidly about that. First of all, I would like to introduce something about the SSPI because it may be a very interesting and curious name of SSPI, South China Sea Situation Probing Initiative. Actually, we are a study network. Our team members are coming from different institutions and centers from China, also along the world. So we are an independent think tank based in Beijing. Our task is to maintain and promote the peace and stability and prosperity of the South China Sea. And the initiative aims to integrate intellectual resources and open source information, such as big data digging worldwide, and keep track of important actions and major policy changes of stakeholders and other parties involved. We have a very ambitious plan, which is kill the fake news in the South China Sea. Today, I thank you so much about the organizers to invite us or invite our delegation to be here. So later we are very open to answer the questions and ask questions for you. And also we want to hear the response from our Philippine side. Thanks. Okay, open the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor Hu Bo. The floor is now open for questions. I will. Somebody sent. We have people watching via Zoom, and also we are on FB Live, Facebook Live. Before they ask questions, I already got a question by Zoom. Can we maybe first question and then anybody here later on? The question sent to me here, how does China respond to the expanding US military presence in the Philippines in the context of great power rivalry or geopolitics rivalry and competition between China and the United States in Asia, or what they call in America as Indo-Pacific region, Asia-Pacific region? What is the response of China to expanding US military presence in the Philippines?
If we look at the locations of the sites, especially on the three sites in the those islands, they, which are very close to Bashi Strait and Taiwan island. So just for my personal opinion, I think Philippines is going too far away towards the power competition between China and US, maybe just behind Japan. You know, most countries in the world are very cautious about the power competition between China and US, especially the other member states don't want to choose sides between China and US. But I don't know what's the decision making happened in Manila, but the consequences are very large. You know, it's a big thing in China. You know, China and the Philippines has a disputes with in the South China Sea. We know that, but Taiwan Strait are different things. Okay, your politicians maybe saying we need a deterrence, we need a self-defense against blah blah blah. But what's the deterrence? The three sides. What's the deterrence for that? The consequence. If you imagine that if future the U.S. use the Philippine side to attack to intervene the Taiwan Strait crisis or attack China's mainland or China's warship and aircraft. Have you guys imagined that? So that's a very big thing. Even in, I think you maybe think, okay, this kind of scenario, it will not happen. China wants to peaceful return the Taiwan back. But even in peaceful time, the US side always talking about that. All the interactions, all the engagements with the Philippines are against China. US are very frankly about that. So the Philippines may be saying, we don't want to, I personally, I don't think that the Philippines will attack China. But the US are always talking about that, like that, okay, we need the sites in Philippines to deterrent China. We need the sites to advance our entry, to advance the competition, to enhance US capacity of operations. So actually, I don't understand why Philippines choose to do that. That you are sovereign states, of course, but you also need to know the consequence of your choice. Thanks.
Thank you very much. General Victor Corpus would like to react. What is your reaction? That's a question of a journalist. Yes.
Let me just give. Hello. Let me just give a background of General Victor Corpus. I don't think he will mind me mentioning his age. He's 78 years old now. He's a former intelligence chief of staff head. He has been on. Hello, testing one. Okay. I'll start from scratch. General Victor Corpus is age 78. He's a retired brigadier general. Am I correct? Or yeah, and he has been with the Philippine Military Academy, and during that period, he joined the rebel movement, and then he was reabsorbed into the armed forces of the Philippines, and he made it to the chief of the ISAF, Intelligence Service of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Am I correct? And so he has written several books, including a very important one that even the US West Point is using, the DMAC points, identifying the weak points of the American defense system. He has been a crusader for the spread of correct information about the relationship between the Philippines and China, South China Sea. I think he is, to my mind, most significant in explaining the dangers of the U.S. presence in the South China Sea and in the Philippines. For example, the explanation that the Manila Trench, am I correct, is the pathway of the American submarines, which is very difficult to be detected from satellite and so on. So he has been very vital in enlightening our population to the dangers of the American presence here. So with that background.
Yeah. I would like to ask a question to the panel. First, I would like to give some background. Way back in 2014, the IMF announced that China has already surpassed the United States in terms of GDP measured in purchasing power parity. And right after that, in 2015, the US Army commissioned the RAND Corporation to develop a strategy to stop China's rise. And this was adopted in 2016. The title of this strategy is War with China, Thinking the Unthinkable. And in that strategy that was adopted by the United States and up to now, their plan is to stop the rise of China by 2025 their target is to bring down the GDP of China by as much as 35% by 2025. So this strategy is ongoing now. That is why we see efforts to steer tension in Taiwan, because this strategy involves three aspects. It should be regional, so that the conflict will be contained in this region that will affect not only China, but the whole of Southeast Asia, including Japan and South Korea, and even Australia. So they want to confine this conflict in this region that will not affect Europe and the United States. Second, it will be a conventional war, because in a conventional war, the conflict will be limited to the region. So it will only affect this region and not Europe and the United States. And third, it must be protracted war, because the longer this conflict is allowed to go on, the greater will be the drop in China's GDP. So their target is to make the GDP of China drop by 35%. So we are now watching, or this strategy is now being implemented. Another important event is in 2019, the United States withdrew from the INF Treaty. This is the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And it is clear that their purpose is to be able to allow the United States to deploy their intermediate range nuclear forces, meaning from 500 kilometers to 5,000 kilometer range of missiles that can be nuclear. And they want to emplace it in countries surrounding China, in South Korea, in Japan, in the Philippines, in Australia, and other islands in between. So they are now implementing that. And one of their plans is to emplace missiles in the Philippines. For instance, if they emplace their missiles in the Philippines, their policy is never to say whether they are nuclear or not, even if we ask. So the question now is, this situation is no different from what happened way back in 1963 in the Cuban Missile Crisis, that missiles were emplaced by Russia or the Soviet Union in Cuba. And it almost triggered a nuclear war. So how is that different if the United States now will emplace their missiles in South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines? Okay. Will China consider that as a first strike at the strategic level, requiring a response? Will China, this is the question, will China wait for those missiles to fall on Beijing and Shanghai? Or will they act and seize the initiative? Because that is their doctrine, to always seize the operational initiative. So what will happen to the Philippines? We will be at the center of a conflict between two superpowers, and we will be serving as their pawns, like what is happening now in Ukraine. There is no difference. We will be proxy to a war between two superpowers, and we will be at the center. We'll be at the epicenter of the battle. We will be at the front line of the battlefield. If I'm China, I will not wait for those missiles to rain on Beijing or Shanghai, because China's military doctrine is always to seize the initiative. If they see that you are preparing to attack, they will attack you first. Although they have that policy that China will never be the first to fire the first shot. But that is at the strategic level. When the US starts deploying those missiles in those 9 bases that are now considered EDCA bases, will China wait for those missiles to rain in Beijing and Shanghai that can reach Shanghai in, say, 15 minutes? So that's the question for the panel now. Will China wait for those missiles to rain in Beijing or Shanghai, or will they strike first?
Very, very serious questions, very thought-provoking. And the panel answer, and General Victor Corpus, a living legend.
I want to add something. I think it also will. I totally agree with you that I think it will make the Philippines in the center of power competition between China and US, and also it will not be any help for the Philippines to defend your claims in the South China Sea, because this kind of arrangement will will make China take the situation very seriously and complicated. If everything United States involved, China would have little room and space to compromise. So the situation, the other cost arrangement, I think, will let the bilateral interaction between the Philippines and China on the South China Sea issue more complicated. So it will not be any help for the Philippines' interest, even in the South China Sea. Thanks.
I have a follow-up question to that. I've been following up the balance of forces between the United States and China. And from my own analysis, the United States will not win a conventional war in the South China Sea or in Taiwan. Because China now has the capability, although about 400 military installations are surrounding China by the United States military. China has the capability of destroying all those 400 military bases in minutes, because you have the hypersonic missiles like the DF-26, the DF-17s, the AS-CH-X-13s, the YJ-21, all supersonic, the DF-21D, the DF-26. You can destroy all bases surrounding China up to beyond Guam. That is the capability of China now. And those 9 bases in the Philippines will only survive within maybe 10 minutes with swarm missile attacks. And China can destroy the US Navy and whatever forces they send to South China Sea without even using a single Chinese soldier or infantry. They can destroy those forces with anti-ship ballistic missiles. They will just use their missiles. And US will surely lose. Now, the question is, if the United States loses and they use the bases in the Philippines to attack China using nuclear weapons, which is very possible because that is the only way they think United States can win in a nuclear war, because they have more warheads than China. But if China combined with Russia, the combination of Russia and China, they have more nuclear warheads than the United States. But US believes that they can win a nuclear war. Now, the question is, if the United States uses those bases to attack China using nuclear weapons, will China counterattack with the same nuclear weapons and wipe out those 9 bases with nuclear? It will be attacked with nuclear warheads. Oh, that's my question to the panel.
Can you respond? Very interesting, serious question.
I haven't imagined so far about a nuclear war, but conventional conflict, if something happened, definitely it will influence Philippines. Now by law, only Japan declares openly that Japan will involved in the possible Taiwan crisis or Taiwan Strait Taiwan war conflict. But I just mentioned before, I think this time Philippines going too far, just behind Japan. Even South Korea declared that before that, our sites are only used in the Korean Peninsula, not in Taiwan. In the wartime, the sites of South Korea will not be used to attack China. So I don't know whether there are limitations from the Philippine side to US that which kind of scenario the sites can be used in wartime. So my answer is to all the Philippine partners. And even there are some, I think some articles and some regulations on that between your treaties with the United States. Can you check them if US wants to use the site in wartime? They are just one in crisis. In the case of the crisis, yeah, they just want to use it because if there are two airbase for the jets, only 30 minutes they can approach Taiwan mainland. So for the
Hi, Wilson.
Yes.
Professor Hu, I have a
Yeah.
question. When you say that the Philippines is going too far, and if I understood you correctly, is that what you said, that the Philippines is going too far? What do you mean by the Philippines going too far? And what are the possible consequences of this action that the Philippines going too far?
Please kindly introduce yourself also.
I'm
Yes.
RG Cruz of ABS-CBN.
Yes, thank you. One of our top TV networks.
okay, it will make China think that in the wartime, US will use your sites to attack China. So that means a lot of things. The consequence is very serious. So nowadays, China only thinks that the US will definitely use the Japan sites to attack China, but now maybe as the Philippines.
There's a question here from Hong Kong, a Filipino journalist, Prime Sarmiento. Later on, you'll continue to get questions from here. Miss Prime Sarmiento in Hong Kong, writing for China Daily. She's a Filipina journalist. Her question is, the Philippines has announced 4 new EDCA sites already with the locations. The sites are facing Taiwan and the disputed South China Sea areas. Is this a provocation against China? How would this affect the Philippines' foreign policy position of non-alignment? Yes.
Just share the Chinese view on that. Definitely 100% provocation.
Yes. Attorney Melissa Loha, international law expert.
Dr. Loha po.
Dr. Loha, yes.
The designation of EDCA sites should not be a provocation against China. It should not be considered an escalation because it's a mere designation of sites. EDCA has been in place since 2014, and there has been a designation of 7 sites without any reaction from China. What could be considered as an escalatory move would be the prepositioning of weapons and military contractors, as well as US troops in those sites. So regardless of where the sites are, the prepositioning of weapons and troops would be the escalatory move. I do not consider the mere designation of sites as any kind of escalation under EDCA, because that has been being done since 2014. Now, I think that it is important as a scholar as well as a citizen. I think it is important for the Philippines as well as for ordinary citizens like me to define our perspective in the current situation. And the first step is to understand that whatever policy we formulate has to be situated within the great power competition that is now ongoing. Now, as to the future of that particular great power competition, the Philippines would now have to define its policy in a way that would ensure the survival of the Philippines. The Philippines, is not about to engage in a great power competition with China or with the United States. We are a mere bystander to this competition. Now, what should be the framework for the purposes of defining our policy? First, we have to understand that the theory in international relations, and of course, theories are imperfect representations of realities in history. The first theory is known as the Thucydides trap. And I think it was Xi Jinping who used this particular formulation in relation to the South China Sea. But the Thucydides trap is not an inevitable war. There can be a management of the conflict in the South China Sea in a way that would allow us to avoid war. The other is what is known as the Kindleberg trap. And here, this is something that is not discussed at all in the Philippines or in China. And that has to do with the capacity of China as a rising power and the decline of the US as a superpower. And that has to do with the capacity of China to step in and deliver what is known as the common goods, such as climate security, energy security, financial security. Right now, we are not just witnessing the Thucydides trap opening up with the escalation in nuclear power as well as conventional power between China and the United States. We are also witnessing the opening up of what is known as the Kindleberg trap, because we are being subjected to financial distress in the financial system. We are being faced with devastation in terms of our climate and so on. What I want to know, or as a citizen who need to make a decision on whether the government, our own government, is making the right choices in terms of these, in terms of its alliances in this context of the great power trap, is whether China is prepared to step up the plate and make sure that there's delivery of common goods, such as financial security, energy security. The Kindleberg trap was defined at the time when US was rising and the Great Britain was in decline, and the world experienced a Great Depression. It also experienced plagues and so on. And the US was unable to fill the shoes of Great Britain and was unable to deliver on what is known as the common goods. And therefore, it brought the entire world into World War II. And so this is another trap that I hope China and the US would be able to respond to if I were just a citizen in a bystander state. Thank you.
Thank you. Can they respond to the question of Dr. Melissa Loha? Anyone who wants to respond before Mr. Laurel? Yes, Doctor. Yes, Dr. Zheng Zhihua
Thank you.
of Shanghai Jiaotong University.
Just to follow Dr. Loha's comments, maybe also questions. I have my own actually puzzle also question. Does the designation of new actor side invite new round arm race in the region, and also leads to strategic misunderstanding, miscalculation, both in China or US? For me, it is quite clear. Maybe we have a little bit of consensus among the delegation. It's kind of provocation to China. So we don't know this kind of action, this kind of move leads to, for example, like promote a mutual understanding, but to actually to uncharted end, actually. So what's your proposal to this kind of scenario?
Yes, Dr. Melis, aloha.
Yes, may statement ba si Kwan? Just a clarification, Professor Hu, as stated by Dr. Loha, that since 2014, the EDCA sites, the original 5 EDCA sites was already there, and there's no any reaction coming from the Chinese government. And now, the decision of the president is to add another 4 EDCA sites. And EDCA sites, it's only an allocation of sites. But we are very much concerned with your statement that the Philippines goes too far. What do you mean by that? Is the decision of the president adding 4 other EDCA sites, is that what? How do you view this? Is this an act of provocation?
You know, before that, we know if the Philippines wants to have some deterrent self-defense in South China Sea, it makes some little sense. But this time, the 3 sides definitely would be used to against China's operations around Taiwan. So it means that the Philippines maybe is passive to involve in the Taiwan issues, the Taiwan military, in the Taiwan crisis or Taiwan issues. So that's a big thing for China.
So just a follow-up again, as stated by General Corpus, if and when the US put their nuclear warheads in the Philippines, are you going to attack us?
I don't know the nuclear weapons, but the aircraft and other weapons definitely will be deployed later. And I don't know how much the Philippines can make a choice. Okay, this kind of weapon you don't. This kind of you don't.
Yeah.
Dr. Loha, yes.
In response to Dr. Zheng, in response to Dr. I think this is in response to Dr. Zheng, as well as in reaction to in response to Dr. Zheng and in reaction to the question from the media, I think we need to differentiate between designation and prepositioning. Prior to the withdrawal of the US from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, this was done in 2019. There was no problem with respect to prepositioning because we were quite confident that the US would not be prepositioning nuclear and conventional missiles with a range of 500 to 5,000 kilometers. But with the withdrawal of the US from the INF Treaty, now there is no assurance for the Philippines or for China and the other ASEAN nations that the US will not preposition these missiles. Now, granted that they will preposition missiles in the Philippines, the prepositioning of these missiles alone is an escalation in the sense that for China, if they detect an aircraft being flying from the Philippine base to the Chinese airspace, and there's an accidental collision or an encounter, then the Philippines becomes involved in that encounter and becomes a legitimate target of any retaliatory action being taken by any state that would be affected by that encounter, be it China or Japan or any states among the littoral states in the South China Sea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May I add, Wilson, no?
Yes.
Before we go to the other, we have a deluge of questions and
Yes.
issues.
There's one from Europe.
From me also.
Yes.
But I'll pick up from Dr. Loha's point that she made. I think I read it, that the Philippines is the only country among ASEAN countries that have arrangements with the United States that does not require inspection of their deployments. So this is very crucial. You cannot expect China to assume innocence of these sites, even if it's only designation. Because I have quotations from Greg Polling of the AMTI, direct quotations, and I can just Google it, saying that the prepositioning of missiles can reach Taiwan from the Philippines. This is an American stating this, So we have to put it together, all the relevant information to understand China's perspective on this matter. Yeah.
Dr. Law.
Let me just
Yeah.
reiterate that in comparison to the EDCA between the United States and Bulgaria, Poland, or Australia, the Philippine EDCA does not give the Philippines government any right to object to the prepositioning of certain types of weapons. With Australia, Bulgaria, and Poland, the EDCA is very clear. Their governments, the host governments, can inspect and then say that this particular type of weapon should not be allowed to enter their territory. With our EDCA, there is no such authority for the Philippines. There's no such authority given to the Philippine government.
Yeah, let's just go to
Thank you.
Aluna,
Dr. Rizal.
Michael
Yes.
Aluna.
Short question, then there's
Yeah, yeah.
Europe question.
Yeah, Michael Aluna.
Aluna.
I used to be a journalist. Anyway, this is addressed to the panel. Do you think the discussion on the South China Sea and the China versus US has become so toxic now? Has become so toxic that there's provocation, escalation of close to be a world war, escalate on media and social media. And do you think that we should focus this time more on how to de-escalate, like probably reviving lessons from history? I can name at least two lessons from history. One is the 1648 Westphalian Treaty of Westphalia, and second is the Deng Xiaoping formula. No, the Deng Xiaoping formula basically is when you have conflicts, tribal conflicts, let's say socialism versus capitalism, the solution is, can we set them aside and work on something that is doable,
Okay,
time bound,
okay,
and mutually beneficial.
okay,
On
Mike.
the Western,
Yeah.
can I proceed with the Westphalian?
No, not,
Okay,
not
Thank you.
impossible to discuss
Thank you.
those details.
Okay,
Let's go to
okay.
We have
Response.
short time lang kasi maraming questions. We have many questions. Yes.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, maybe I can add some of my thinking, for the previous discussion. Well, I wanted
Thank
to
you.
recall that with China and the Philippines, we established our bilateral relations since the year 1975. And for the past 48 years, I think the two countries were basically have this warm relationship. And myself, have many friends in Manila. And I think that is the basis of what everything we've been talking about. And also we established the comprehensive strategic cooperation relations in the year 2018 when the President Xi paid a state visit to Manila. So that's what we're talking about. So when and also, but I do aware that there is this territorial dispute and maritime jurisdictional dispute between us in the South China Sea. So when I try to understand what Professor Hu Bo says, the Philippines goes too far. What I understand is that, correct me if I'm wrong. He probably is saying that the Philippines can deal with China with our South China Sea dispute, but going to be involved in the Taiwan issue, that's another story. You see, Taiwan is an inseparable part of China, and we have this one China policy, and everyone knows about that. So it's definitely our national issue. It's not an international issue. So, so we are just a bit worried that involving in those Taiwan issue and will be the very risky decision for the Philippines. And also, I noticed that there are several articles and commentaries written by our Filipino friends. One is from, I read it from this March in Diplomat, written by Eric of National Defense College of the Philippines. Well, he thinks that he has the argument that Manila should change the narrative from a focus on how to defend against China to a strategy of deterring China, right? And also the ambassador of the Philippines in the United States, he has an article in 2 days ago and quoting this argument. And I think that the ambassador Romuald Des, he's echoing this deterrence strategy. So I personally think that the strategy, the changing from defensive to China to deterrence of China is an upgrade of the Philippines security strategy. And maybe that change is from the South China Sea to the Taiwan's issue. So that worries us. And from that, our feeling is that it's a bit provocative and probably will lead to another round of action, reaction, competition, arms competition, and the tension in the South China Sea will rise following that. So that's my personal understanding. Let's just keep China, the Philippines relations to the South China Sea and all the trade relationship between us. China is already the biggest trading partner of the Philippines. Let's not forget about that. And we are still hoping, especially after the President Marcos visit to China in this January, we're still hoping an upgrade of our relationship after that and during the Marcos administration. So we're just hoping to have a better, relationship and don't want the U.S. to be in the middle of it.
Yes. Well,
Thank you very much.
we're co-hosting, no? So I will also assert myself because he's very polite to people. He cannot stop people. I can stop you and
Yes.
anybody. I will limit all reactions to
Yes,
2-3 minutes
because we have
maximum. Okay.
limit the time.
Okay,
There's a
but
question
no,
here.
wait, Wilson. I just want to back up what I said about Greg Polling's statement. You read this Rappler report. Gregory Polling, a Southeast Asia expert at Washington Center for Strategic and International Studies think tank, said access to sites in northern Luzon would help U.S. efforts to deter any Chinese move against Taiwan by putting the waters to the south of the island within shore-based missiles. We Filipinos should read these things. Sila, mga Amerikano nagsasabi, mag-send sila missiles dito. Ano ba tayo, mga torpe? Okay, my 2 minutes is up.
Thank you. There's a question here from, there's a question here from Professor Henry Chan, based in Singapore. He is now in Europe watching our webinar. Dr. Henry Chan, the question is, he said, the question is, throughout history, world history, no rising world power will watch and allow its territory to be separated. Like in the U.S. Civil War, they will not allow separation of their territory. The Taiwan issue is an important issue for China. What is this being considered, being given consideration with all this EDCA and all this? That's his question. He said also, General Victor Corpus comments earlier are very serious, worth serious consideration. What will be the consequences to the Philippines if the U.S. loses the Taiwan Strait war? He asked this question. Yes, to General Corpus and the guest from Beijing. He also said that in all the USA Taiwanese war simulations in the past 10 years by the Americans, in all the 10 years now, the Americans lose in every one of the war simulations. Question.
What is the question again?
His question is, throughout history of the world, no rising power will just allow its territory to be separated. Like in the US case, they will not allow the South and the North to be separated. Are we thinking of that when we try to get involved in the Taiwan issue? The Philippines now is asking Dr. Henry Chan of Singapore. From Singapore.
On the side of China, I don't think they will allow any violation of their sovereignty, especially Taiwan. And they will go to war for that. And if we allow ourselves to be taken into that war, we will be the big loser. Like what is happening in Ukraine now. It is the Ukrainians that are dying, not the Americans or the NATO. So if a war breaks out in Taiwan and we get involved by allowing the US bases or EDCA bases to be used by American troops and American missiles, we will surely be attacked. That's for sure.
Yes, media questions.
First, I would
Microphone,
like,
please.
I would like to ask one.
Ay tanong sila dito. Sorry.
I would like to ask one question. When Bong went to visited Beijing, he said he will expand the Philippine-Chinese relations. I don't know the term. I think deepen Philippine-Chinese relations. But immediately after that, he increased the number of EDCA bases. But tingin ko, it's a contradiction. It is a contradiction. You cannot expand the friendship, but at the same time, adding the number of bases in the Philippines. That's another thing. And let me add this. The Philippines, we are complaining to China that the islands were how we call that, it was not conquered, occupied by China. But these are islands demarcated by the Philippines. It means that these islands outside of the does not belong to the Philippines. Good example is Parasol Island, Spratly Islands. Karamihan mga yan, nasa labasan ng bakri natin.
Question. Yes.
Kung ito, tinan mo mapa natin.
What is the
Paris.
question? Yes. What is the question? Sorry.
Yan, di ba sinasabi natin inaagaw sa atin ng lupa? Ang Islam. Hindi na talaga, nasa mapa natin yan eh.
So what is the question? I think. Yes, question our media friends over there. Thank you, Mr. Rod Caponan.
Good
Yes.
afternoon, sirs and madams. Chino Gaston from GMA7.
Another major television
Yes,
station.
just a
Yes.
journalist. Your honors, pwedeng magtanong, well, in English. So, hearing the discussions this afternoon about EDCA and then in relation to the previous question also, you think the president made a mistake in allowing EDCA to continue and then to allow more EDCA sites if we are to believe our friends from China saying that it brings the country to the brink of war, no? Almost just hair breadth away from war if the Taiwan conflict escalates. Thank you. So again, yung question ko would be, did the president make a mistake? No.
Yes, to the visitors. Yes. Thank you. He's a humble but top journalist. Yes.
Frankly speaking, I think it is wrong because it doesn't have any help to Philippines' interest. I think all the world may think that this side is against China in Taiwan's Strait crisis. It is we should not be too naive about that. In the world, everyone knows that. So and the Washington are very frankly about that. We are advanced the front deployment, which is serve for the power competition with China. Everything in the West Pacific is about China. So how can Philippines be not involved in the future? I think where's the scenario? So
I think
Dr. Romel would like to respond also. Dr. Romel Banlawi to the same question. Yes. Respond to is it a mistake by the president? The question of Chino.
They need to answer the question of Chino.
yeah, they
Ah.
answered the
They answered it. Yeah.
I just came from China where I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Yan Yan and Professor Hubo in a conference about the South China Sea at the sideline of the BOA Forum. But outside of the conference, I had deep conversation with senior security experts in China. And I'd like to share the general narrative of these Chinese experts. One, confirmation of China's reaction about EDCA expansion that they find our decision provocative. Second, they find it as a betrayal of mutual understanding between Philippines and China made during the visit of President Bongbong Marcos in China in January 2023, where they had an understanding to settle their differences in a friendly consultations. And the expansion of EDCA is not a friendly gesture. And thirdly, because of that narrative, the Philippine government needs to face all possible consequences, because definitely China will not take the issue lightly and China will react. Okay, so that's one. Now, we are always putting the issue within the frame of major power competition between China and the United States. And that's all natural because the Philippines is at the crossroads of the Indo-Pacific, and therefore we're naturally at the crossroads of major power rivalry. But if you will analyze all the locations of EDCA, including the original and the new sites, there is deep strategic intention of the part of the Philippines, especially on the part of the armed forces of the Philippines. Why is it so? First, the 5 original locations aim really to meet the requirements of the armed forces of the Philippines to really develop the structure of their existing Philippine bases. And the United States agreed to contribute to the development of these Philippine bases, but of course, with the quid pro quo, allow construction also of American military facilities. And if you will look at the new sites also, I have visited all these 4 locations. If you will visit all these Philippine military bases, these are all underdeveloped Philippine military bases. And General Victor Corpus can confirm that. It's really, yeah. And allowing American military facilities there will facilitate the development of Philippine bases in that area in terms of constructions of runway and also improving the ports. And that is the internal consideration. However, this short-term internal consideration to meet the objective of the military to develop credible minimum force has a far-reaching long-term security consequences that all Filipinos, not only the Philippine government, need to face. Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Dr. Loha, and
Yes,
get the mic.
you want to react, Dr. Melissa Loha?
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Loha.
Yes, I think it's this type of generalizations that get China in trouble with Philippine media to completely dismiss the decision of the president to designate EDCA as a mistake. I think is a generalization that is difficult to understand, given that we are in a forum where we're supposed to academically study in detail the actions being taken by the Philippines. Remember that the designation is different from the prepositioning. It is when the president or the government fails to assert its authority with respect to the types of weapons that are prepositioned that might be considered as an escalatory move on the part of the Philippine government. But the designation of EDCA sites are completely within the right of the Philippines as a sovereign state. And we have to remember as well that the Supreme Court upheld our EDCA. And therefore, no foreign country, no foreign government can reverse the decision of our Supreme Court. But what needs to be understood by the Philippine government is that it has to assert its authority with respect to the types of weapons. That is a distinction that we need to make rather than make generalizations, rather than to lecture the Philippine government on what it needs to do or what it should not do. Remember that we need to be culturally sensitive in our discussions, in our dialogues. We wish that China would stop imitating America as if it's a regional hegemon. We know that America behaves towards its proxies as though they can lecture and tell us what to do or not to do. I wish that China should not imitate the US in terms of behaving like a regional hegemon and telling us what not to do. Thank you.
There's a question. Sorry, there's another question related to what Dr. Banlawi just said earlier. The question from a journalist coming from Zoom and Facebook. Do you think the expansion of EDCA military bases will have an impact on Philippines-China bilateral relations? How and why? As Dr. Banlawi just said, would you reply and then the guest?
In my opinion, it's damaging to Philippines-China. It's really damaging.
To the panel also, what is your reaction to the same question from a journalist?
Yeah, Rod, any other question from the media, from GMA7, ABS-CBN? Yeah, Mauro Samonte, columnist of the Manila Times.
Yes, a question? Any question to the?
Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Mauro Samonte, do you have a question? Dr. Mauro Samonte, a geopolitics analyst and Manila Times columnist, also book author. Welcome.
Yeah, I'd like to set things in order. What are we going to really, what are we driving at with this discussion? No, I think we haven't touched on exactly what's going on. The movements of the United States in the South China Sea, the deployment of warships, etc. This EDCA expanded sites strikes me as too obvious for comfort. The United States is reputed to be an expert at deceit and subterfuge. That what it is doing now might not be exactly what it is intending to do. You get my point. During World War II, the objective of the United States, the Allied forces, was to defeat Germany, to liberate France from the occupation of the Nazi forces. So what did the Operation Overlord do? They impressed upon the Germans that they're going to attack France from the nearest point from the United Kingdom, which is Pas de Calais. What I'm trying to say is what the United States is doing now, deploying this warship in the South China Sea, might not be the one that is actually intending to do. You get my point? We seem to be, what do you call this, barking up the wrong tree. We must be able to define exactly what the United States strategic objective is.
So, final minute, what is the strategic objective?
That's precisely my question. What is the United States strategic objective really is?
Maybe Dr. Loha and the guest would like to comment on the question of Mr. Samonte. Anyone here?
Maybe General Corpus's point to make here.
Yeah. The U.S. objective is clearly stated in the Rand Corporation strategy that the United States is implementing now. Their objective is to bring down the GDP of China by as much as 35% by 2025 by launching a conventional, a regional, and a protracted war. And it is ongoing now. So that is the objective. And the United States is following that strategy. But not many knows about it.
Any response?
Please,
response from the panel.
Yes.
One follow-up, please.
As the U.S. saying in the objectives in the South China Sea, such as we are here to maintain the freedom of navigation, we are here to protect our allies and partners. But those statements are not the real reason for the U.S. operation action in the South China Sea. Maintaining a balance of power, in just as I mentioned yesterday, maintaining a balance of power in favor of U.S. itself, it also means that maintaining hegemony rather than the freedom of navigation or the security of regional countries is at the root of all U.S. actions and policy in the region. So definitely the U.S. objective first priority is not to protect the Philippines. That's a fact and the truth. And so I think the Philippines should know it very well. So U.S. has used a lot of narratives to testify its operations and policies, but the real policy, all the actions, operations is around China and is about the great power competition with China.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
And down.
Please.
So
Go ahead. Let's have Professor Hu finish his point.
So for the Chinese side, China would not naive and would not counter on the goodwill of the United States. So, and also, we have mentioned before, the Philippines can barely influence U.S. decisions, military decisions here. So that's the problem. So China's goal may be not to against the Philippines, but because of the U.S., China must consider the complicated between the U.S.-Philippines alliance, especially as the forces in the new forces in the ADCA arrangement. So that's the objective of the U.S.
Okay, the only one who hasn't spoken and has raised his hand is
Mr.
Peter Q.
Lavinia.
Lavinia, no? Peter Q.
Yes,
Can
from
we go
Davao.
to the others? No?
Peter Lavinia.
It's okay, just close it. Just very close to the, yes.
Thank you, Kamentong. Thank you, everyone. Let me be a voice in the wilderness. While it is true that foremost in our minds are the issues on conflict and potential of war in our region, but I would like also to pose a question about promoting peace. And I'd like to pay honor to Premier Chow En-lai, who initiated the 5 principles of coexistence. When China, after the founding of the People's Republic, started to deal with its neighbors in promoting the 5 principles of coexistence. Later, it was adopted in Bandung, 68 years ago this month, April. And later, the same principles adopted by the ASEAN, adopted by the United Nations. But no one seems to be discussing peace. Everyone is talking about war. So anyone who'd like to join me in promoting peace? That's the question.
Okay, so we are giving priority of media and then to the scholars and so on.
Yes.
Except the panel, of course, the top
Question
priority. So we go to Vic Sumita.
Yeah, yes.
of,
My
25.
final question to summarize our discussion now. Who is now provoking war in the region? Is it China or US?
Do you care to respond?
Please reply.
I can share with you a story. You know, I have talked about with our U.S. counterparts several times on that. If the China sent thousands sources of aircraft and hundreds of warships every year approaching U.S., what the U.S. will do? These guys, these guys almost perform the same. Firstly, keep silent. Then say, if you doing that, you are the change the status quo. So I think China is in a very defensive position in the power competition. All the encounters, maritime and air encounters are happened in China's surrounding waters, sometimes in China's airspace. So China definitely is in defensive position. If the U.S. were in China's position, I think the U.S. maybe is too much anxiety in China.
Okay, Michael Alunan, very quick.
Your question, yes.
Yeah.
Please share your question.
I'm just following up the question of Mr. Lavinia. What's the academic community of China proposing as a solution to this escalating noise on provocations towards war. Because in contrast, the academe in the Western world, America, British, they churn out books. How many books? Like the Thucydides trap that has been debunked by two academic scholars, no? One from Harvard, another one from Stanford. Anyway,
Thank you.
Samuel Huntington's Class of Civilization, which justifies that inevitable the conflict of
my
Muslim,
question.
Christian, etc. So,
Thank you.
what's the where do we go from here? Can
you.
we, as a solution to
Yeah.
push for peace?
Michael, I think the next question from EDC Center texted to us again, texted to them and texted to us, asked, I think, a very relevant question, which I think Professor Hu already started in. The question is, can SCSPI, your group, your experts, share the data of military assets in the South China Sea by US, China, and other claimant states? Yeah. So people can see what the reality on the ground is.
You know, we can share to the government and the think tanks selectively. We don't want to share with them into public because we don't want to make it public alert, make it public alert. Because I know the public, especially the media, you guys, you every day want to have some big news, but the real situation, even the power competition and the disputes in the South China Sea are very serious and intense. But I should say most of the encounters and the interactions are professional and safe. So not every day there are some risks. Yes, definitely they have. So if some think tanks and governments need the information data, we are open to share. And also I can share with where can we can get this data. And we use the AIS, AGSB, and remote satellite.
Explain what AES and all these things.
AIS.
What is AES?
Automatic identification system. Yeah, for ship to ship, just for the safety. For the safety, the AGSB, the air, almost the same air. I mean the aircraft. I couldn't remember. Okay, but it is for the traffic, air traffic, for the safety of air traffic.
So SCSPI has a whole array of information.
No, this time there are I think maybe 30 almost 30 databases in the world that include such as EIS and the AGSB. They are commercial.
Yes, there's somebody watching us, a professor from University of the Philippines, also policy analyst of Senpek think tank, Professor Bobby Tuason. He has a question for Dr. Yan. Professor Bobby Tuason of UP said, is President Bongbong Marcos being complicit to the United States by deepening the Philippines defense alliance with the US? Will this not lead China to review its MOU signed with BBM during the last state visit? This is from Professor Bobby Tuason, one of the top geopolitics analysts in the Philippines. Yes. For Dr. Yan, he said.
I think I can address this question in connection with the previous question regarding what should we do in the future. I think that there are different ways and different things that we can really do, for the two countries on the multilateral level and on the bilateral level. On the multilateral level, I think currently both China and the Philippines are involved in the COC negotiation. And I think that's for the establishing the rules for all of our regional countries to decide by ourselves, what do we really want? And for crisis management in the region. And I think that's on the multilateral level is what China and the Philippines can do, all together. And also on the bilateral level, as the question from online from the UP professor also mentioned about the joint statement and the MOU signed between China and the Philippines when President Marcos visits. I think it's only what he visited only in January. So it's about only 3 months. I think to implement those cooperative proposals, it takes time. And also, I think the first project probably we will see is the export of durian to China. Well, I heard from the Filipino news that it will come very soon. The Philippines export the durian from Davao City to China.
April 6th. My
Yes,
friend in
April 6th,
Davao,
right.
my
Yes.
friend in Davao sent me a good news. April 6th, the first durian export of Philippines to
Yes,
China
lovely.
from Davao.
Lovely. So we're thinking, what I'm saying is that we already see the implementation of those, of the outcome of President Marcos' visit to China. And also we have to continue our previous projects. China have been invested in more than 40 projects in the Philippines, several million US dollars, like the Binondo Intramuros Bridge, the Kaliva Bank, Dam, Kaliva Dam, etc. So maybe I think that it takes time to implement, but I do have faith in the future cooperation.
This is just a side comment. Maybe Eric Javier, who wrote that article in The Diplomat, wants to deter all this project.
Oh my God, that's very sad.
By
That's
the
very
way,
sad.
I heard if Kaliwa Dam is finished, it will help the water supply of Metro Manila, which is now quite low. Yes, Professor Babitoason wants to thank you, Miss Professor Yan. He said he met you years ago in Hainan during an academic exchange.
Thank you. And
Yes.
please, I welcome him to come back to Hainan again
Yes,
in the future.
Professor Babitoason. Thank you. Yes, General Victor Corpus has a question or comment.
I read before that China has offered the Philippines a 60-40 sharing in oil drilling in the South China Sea.
Very good. 3 questions about that.
In the Philippines' favor, 60-40. Compared to our agreement with Shell drilling in the South China Sea, 90-10 in Shell's favor. What happened to that offer? Is it still open?
It's a good question. 3 journalists also asked that question. Joint oil and gas venture, is it still possible? Is there still hope?
I think as to the oil and gas development, joint development, the ball is not on the Chinese side. China is always open, just as you see, very open and relaxed to the sharing and other issues, other arrangements. The problem now is that the ball is on the Philippine side. So the Philippines may think that this area was a disputed area is ours. So we have, if there are some arrangement with China that would not be accepted in politics. So that's a problem.
That is also the question of TV5 journalist, Miss Camille Samonte, watching us, and 3 other journalists. Thank you for your question. So the ball is in the hands of the Philippines. Dr. Melissa Loja.
Yes, I would like to clarify, sir, that it's not the 90-10 sharing arrangement with Shell in Malampaya. It's 70-40 because that is the provision of the law. It should not go below 60-40. And with respect to the negotiations on joint exploration, we need to be very clear again with distinctions. I'm very sorry for being particular about distinctions and to hate generalizations. We need to distinguish between joint exploration and joint development. Joint development presupposes an overlap in maritime zones and presupposes a delimitation of the overlap. There is no overlap as far as the South China Sea Arbitral Award provides. Now, joint exploration is very different. It can be an area which is designated by all claimants to a body of water, and their service contractors would engage in exploration or surveys only. No drilling is going to be taking place. Now, the purpose of a joint exploration is to detect whether there is a structure, an oil or gas structure that straddles a claimed line. So, for example, if this were an oil and gas, let us pretend that this is an oil and gas structure. Now, if there is a claimed line on this side and there are two straws, one state such as China, if assuming there's no arrangement for cooperation, whether exploration or exploitation, one state such as China can drain the entire structure from its side of the disputed line. In the same way that the Philippines can do that, but which state has the capacity to do so? China, because it has well advanced in its exploration engineering. Therefore, there is a need for the Philippines to accept that reality in science and in nature, that an oil structure will not respect delimitation lines, it will not respect maritime claims. It will just follow the flow of physics, which state is able to drill into that structure and suction out drain out all of the deposit, whether gas or oil. Therefore, we need to cooperate, we need to negotiate. And we have to remember as well that the Constitution, the Philippine Constitution, the Chinese Constitution, the Vietnamese Constitution, or Malaysian Constitution has no application in the EEZ, because the EEZ is not part of the territory of any claimant state. It is a body of water. A definition of a territory is one that you can occupy. Unless we turn ourselves into mermaids, we cannot occupy the EEZ because it is a superjacent water from the seabed. And therefore, the Constitution has no application in the EEZ. We need to have an international law instrument, an agreement, which is defined by international law.
Thank you, Dr. Melissa Loha, law expert. There's a question here for Dr. Romel Panlawi and Mr. Peter Labinia and other Philippine experts from a journalist again via Zoom. Do you think, since the EDCA issue seems to be controversial and even considered possibly increasing tensions in the region, do you think there's a chance that the renewal, full implementation, and expansion of this controversial EDCA will be reconsidered under a Marcos Jr. presidency? What efforts do you think are needed to achieve this renewal, review, or changing of this policy? Like Dr. Loha said, there are disadvantages compared to the European versions of the EDCA. How come we are not reviewing? What can we do now, the Philippine side?
Fact first, the existing EDCA will expire next year, 2024. Second fact, that the new EDCA is still under negotiation. There's already a draft from the United States, and it's still being reviewed by the Department of Justice.
Still a draft.
But it will be taken seriously for discussion when EDCA expires in 2024. And the implementation of new sites will largely depend on the content of the new agreement for extension. Okay, but if you are opposing EDCA, now is the time to make noise because we still have 1 year. Okay, we still have 1 year to do that. Okay, why? Responding to the question of Sir Samonte about American strategic tension and the response of Chinese and Filipino intellectuals, first, it has already been confirmed by the Department of Defense asking for $842 billion budget for defense in order to prepare the United States for potential military conflict with China. And therefore, US is preparing for war. But if you will look at the Global Security Initiative of China, China wants to avoid war and wants international economic activities to happen, arguing that war is inimical to commerce and trade. So you see two different perspectives from the US and China. US is preparing for war, but China wants to avoid war. China wants commerce and trade to occur. Now, EDCA is not only damaging to Philippines-China relation, it is disruptive of the implementation of comprehensive strategic cooperation and counterproductive to the plans of the two countries to pursue comprehensive strategic partnership. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, hello.
Good recommendation, Dr.
Because I want to
Thank you.
make one point. No?
Yes.
I think, of course, I appreciate Dr. Loha's very objective perspective and very incisive observations, the details. But I think we must maintain our overview. The question that was raised a while ago, what is the strategic intention of the US? I think it's very clear. There's beyond any doubt amongst intellectual scholars and so on, that the US is in a drive for war. And intention is to, I'm sorry, kanina pa natin na-recognize. I'll go back to you first.
Good afternoon. I'm
Yes.
Alvin Pelabello from Euro TV News.
Yes.
Since the discussion have come to the recent visit of President Marcos to China, do you think that this EDCA issue would be one of the parameters that will undergo or will be the content of the incoming discussions between China and the Philippines when it comes to the exploration of oil and gas in the West Philippines?
Well, that's what I was saying just now, and that's my worry that US will be in the middle of an enhanced China-Philippine relations, because I'm really looking forward to an upgrade of bilateral relations between the two of us, especially after President Marcos' visit to China. But it's only been 3 months, and then we see EDCA expansion, et cetera, So I'm worried that this might impede the future bilateral relations. And also about the joint development or oil and gas joint exploration. Well, I think Melissa's right, and I wanted to echo that oil and gas cooperation and oil and gas joint development are two different things. But we do see some successful case in the region, like Malaysia and Thailand. They have successfully have joint cooperation, joint development projects in the year since the year in the 1990s, and they have this joint authority established and to discuss about the taxation, technology, a share of benefits, et cetera. It takes time, but I think it's worth it. So in the future, I think I'm hopefully, I think that maybe under the President Marcos administration, we can discuss further about this issue. And I do notice a news released by the Philippines today saying that the two countries will continue our talk of oil and gas exploration in since May. So that sounds like a good news to me, because at least we are starting to talk about this under this President Marcos government. It's the first time that I have this clear information from the Philippines. So I think I still have hope of this issue, and I really hope that the EDCA won't be in the middle of the future China-Philippines relations. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm requested, Michael, to read this, no? From kasi he has difficulty, our 82-year-old writer and scholar has some difficulty in reading or expressing. Mauro Samontes says, obviously, I had difficulty with my speech, so I am writing this out for reading by you. It is given that the objective of the US is to defeat China. My final question is, how is this going to be done? What's taking place in the South China Sea is too obvious for comfort. All attention is being brought to the expanded EDCA together with war exercises in the South China Sea, just as all attention was brought to the Allied preparations for the attack on Pas-de-Calais. What actually took place was called the Allied invasion at Normandy, called D-Day, which signaled the ultimate defeat of the Germans. What would be the final US move in analogy of Operation Overlord that resulted in the successful D-Day? This is a very long history, Mauro. I don't know if anybody can answer that.
Yes, a short answer.
Maybe we'll give it time.
Yes,
Maybe General Corpus can comment on this.
Or we have two questions
go
from
ahead,
Hong
go
Kong.
ahead. Go-
Yes, we have two questions from Miss Prime Sarmiento, a journalist. She said, in what areas should ASEAN and China, the Philippines and China, jointly strengthen cooperation to safeguard regional security and stability? First question. Second question of Prime Sarmiento, how should Asian countries set aside their conflicts and continue their security cooperation to safeguard the peace and stability of the whole region and counter interferences from external forces? This is from journalist Prime Sarmiento watching us via Zoom and Facebook Live. Yes, two questions. Yes.
Oh, I think that between China and the Philippines, I think that for the long term, we have something to do. And in the short term, we have another thing to do. Well, for the long term, we still need to resolve the dispute, maritime dispute between us, and only between us, not the involvement of any extra-regional countries, because that's only between us. And maybe we can deal with it under the BCM or diplomatic talks, negotiations, et cetera, but it takes time, and we do aware of that. But in the short term, there is exactly something that we can do. Like, for example, after President Marcos' visit to China, we established this hotline between foreign ministries in China and the Philippines. And this hotline, I think, really works, you know, in the incidents happened during these 3 months. So I think it's working. And also I'm thinking, that's my personal thinking and suggestion. I'm thinking maybe we can establish a hotline in between our defense departments or maritime law enforcement departments. You know, when anything happens and we can manage the crisis, you know, at 1 minute or 1 second, or in a very short time, when anything happens, the two law enforcement agencies can call each other and talk to each other and to manage the crisis among us. So this is the suggestion that, in my mind, from my personal point of view, that we can do. I really think that we can do. That's my short answer to the question.
Wilson. Oh yeah, please go ahead.
And also, I think the communication is very, very important. You know, every incident happened in the South China Sea. Both sides have a different understanding and different perspective. I think it is okay. The problem is that you know, we come from China, you know, in Beijing and other cities. It is ridiculous to think that Beijing will have some negative things to Philippines. So it is ridiculous to think that China will threaten Philippines. But in Manila, I know it is very popular that Beijing is threatening us everywhere, every day. So it's you can say how much the misunderstanding and the misconclusion between us. So I think the communication and dialogue are very, very important about the maritime issues. Thanks.
Yeah, Michael, just in relation to earlier points about strategic intentions, I think this is important to inform the public. The National Intelligence Agency of the United States itself, in a Senate hearing, March 10, reported China doesn't want a war over Taiwan. U.S. Spy Chief Avril Haines says this is in a official Senate hearing. They know China does not want war. No, that's the important point, because all the details, when we discuss it, we lose track of the strategic picture, and this is the real strategic picture. China is not the one pushing for war, and if it is sensing some insecurity because of the actions of the Americans, there is justification for it. Okay, Rod and then Michael.
Is China
Rod and Michael. Wait, before, I'm sorry, because the question of Mauro Samonte precedes, no?
Yes,
And General has a
answer to
answer to
Mr.
this.
Samonte.
With regards to the question of columnist Mau Samonte, how will the United States achieve their objective of stopping China's rise by 2025? Well, there are three main elements of this strategy on how the United States intend to stop China's rise. First, the war that they are going to wage will be regional, limited to the region in the South China Sea, but that will include all the ASEAN states. That will affect also Japan and South Korea and the Philippines, and perhaps Australia as well. They want to keep the conflict limited to this region so that Europe and the United States, North America will not be affected. That's the purpose of that strategy. Second, conventional war. They want to keep the war conventional, not going to nuclear. Why? Because with the nuclear war, the United States will also be wiped out. China has the capability now to wipe out the entire United States with their nuclear weapons. What more if Russia joins China? So the whole world will be, the whole of humanity will be adversely affected. Third, the third element of that strategy is protracted war. They want to protract the war because the longer the war is allowed to drag on, the greater will be the fall of China's economy. But that is a pipe dream because China now has the capability of wiping out the 400 military bases in less than a day. China has the capability of wiping out all the C4ISR based on satellites because China has the capability to shoot down those satellites from the ground. And China has the capability of wiping out the US Navy that enters this area. Every single floating warship can be destroyed by China's anti-ship ballistic missiles. So, the US dream of protracting this war is a pipe dream because China can defeat the United States within, if not days, hours. Okay.
So Mauro nods in agreement that it answers his question. So we go to Rod and Michael. Rod,
like to make some clarification. So in 2019, during visit of Foreign Minister Wang Yi, together with our Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Locsin, they discussed the Joint Exploration Agreement. The problem is that the Philippines, it was understood that the Philippines will be represented by the Philippine government, that is PNOC. On the other hand, China will be represented by the Chinese National Chinese Oil Company. So it's a state-to-state basis agreement. The state government represented by PNOC and also the state government represented by China. But the problem in the Philippines is that we subcontracted certain areas to other companies like First Gas and Prime, owned by Pangilinan, another owned by Forum Energy. It was subcontracted to private oil companies, the same area. So, nagkaroon ng problema doon. So the Chinese began to question that issue. While we were talking about government-to-government basis, the Philippines subcontracted the same area to private companies. Kaya nagkaroon ng problema dyan eh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rod Kapunan. Thank you very much.
Is
Yes.
there-
Question from Mr. Mike Luna. Yes. Narinig ka. Yes.
Anyway,
Clear.
is there truth to the rumor that China is behind or is serious with the support of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS Plus Global Coalition, no, that they're developing an alternative to the dollar as an international currency, because over the past recent months, there have been many of these transactions, trade transactions, have been paid now in yuan, even Saudi oil.
Okay.
Yuan.
Interesting
So
question.
let's get the
Yes.
answer.
So, and
Yes.
what would be their
Yes.
consequences if ever?
Thank you, Mr. Mike Alona, for that
It's
question.
not their expertise, finance.
Not
okay.
the expertise. There's another question. Thank you very much, Mr. Yes, Mr. Mike Alona. There's another question here from our friends in media via Zoom. Do you think the Philippines and China are close geographically, and the Philippines is one of China's important trading partners in ASEAN? What areas do you think the Philippines and China can further strengthen cooperation to address the current complex geopolitical situation of all these EDCA, territorial? What other areas of cooperation do you recommend between Philippines and China?
Thank you. I want to combine this question with the previous one of joint development. I think there are 4 pillars of areas that we can cooperate in the future: energy, agriculture, infrastructure, and also people to people, cultural exchange. And that's the 4 areas that has nothing to do with security, and we can, further promote in the future. And we already have like more than 40 projects, conducting now. So let's just continue that. And also talking about joint and oil and gas cooperation, I'm thinking maybe we can start from the projects in the undisputed areas, like service contract 57, that the CNOC already been part of this project. It's already owned by the Philippine oil company. And I think that in the Calaman area, I think that's the starting point of our oil and gas exploration cooperation in the future, because the area was totally undisputed. And there won't be any legal obstacles to that. So that's my personal suggestion.
Very good. Dr. Loha has additional suggestions for the question. Yes. Dr. Melissa Loha, who I saw in the Senate hearing. Very interesting. March 1.
I wish to disagree with my classmate, Dr. Yan Yan. Surely, if it's an undisputed area, it belongs to the Philippines, and therefore there ought to be no contemplation of a joint agreement with respect to the exploration and exploitation of a joint area, of an undisputed area. The authority to license service contracts in those undisputed area belongs solely to the Philippines. It cannot be subject to negotiation with a foreign country.
Maybe joint venture, parang Shell. Joint venture like Shell Manampaya. I think joint venture.
Then if it's a joint venture, it does not go through negotiation between government to government. Rather, it has to go through a bidding and award process.
Yes. Thank you. By the way, earlier in answer to the question, the durian export will start April, 2 days from now, April 6, Thursday, 9 a.m. The first flight, first shipment of Philippine durian to People's Republic of China will start 2 days from now, Thursday. It's a holiday all over the Philippines, but the durian farmers are happy working. Yes.
Okay. Considering the area of cooperation, I think I just noted the statement between President Xi Jinping and President Marcos in this January. They were saying that despite the oil and gas cooperation in the South China Sea, you can also promote some of the other energy corporations
just like renewable energies, wind, and other kind of this kind of clean energy cooperation. So I think this is very maybe a new site or a new vision for the China and the Philippines to have strengthen their relationships.
Okay, I have a question that I think is very relevant also for the media, because for the past 4 years, I constantly see, and the general public in the Philippines constantly see, almost by ritual, every 3 months, 2 months, there's this allegation of Chinese maritime militia harassing Filipino fishermen, Chinese militia parked in Whitsun Reef, 200 of them. And of course, the answer of the Chinese embassy in the Philippines, these are just fishing boats. They will soon leave because then the fishing season will start. They will start scattering all. What is the truth? I have my own view of this, but I'd like to hear and have the media hear your answer.
The Chinese side, yes.
You know, I think the China's maritime militia is not just maybe the biggest, not just biggest, also the China's threat in the West countries. The theory of China's threat, maritime threat. Now they take every fishing vessels of China as the maritime militia. You know, actually we have lawyers today, lawyer and Xiaolu. According to international law, it's difficult to judge whether this fishing vessels is militia or not. So we should not judge. We only judge the actions of the fishing vessels. If the fishing vessels acting as a militia, it is militia. Otherwise, you couldn't think that because this ship is belong to China, so that's the China's maritime militia. It's too simplified. As to the situation in around the Whitsun Reef and around the Subi Islands, the story is that in the China's perspective, all these areas are in the disputed. Chinese fishing vessels has a right to be there. Yes, their actions may be unusual, but they have never shown any threatening signal towards the Philippines. So according to my observation, China has never used militia against Philippines. So that's the truth and fact. There are a lot of incidents happen at the sea, but I think for China, it's nonsense to use militia against Philippines. You know, China is a very diversified country now. Every fishing vessels, every boss, they have their agendas. So we shouldn't take every Chinese like us and every fishing vessels as the agents of China's government. So that's ridiculous. So if sometimes the fishermen did pose some threat towards the Philippines, I think it makes sense that you guys protest with Beijing. But otherwise, they'll be there peacefully in the disputed areas. So maybe in the Philippines say, maybe Philippines side, you maybe take this is your EEZ, but in Chinese perspective, definitely it is in the disputed areas. Thanks.
Thank you for clarifying. There's a question here related to what Dr. Romel Banlawi before the beginning suggested. He suggested there should be more cooperation between the military and the Coast Guard and the navies between the Philippines and China. What are your suggestions to the China and Philippine intellectuals? That was the suggestion of Dr. Romel Banlawi. He said many of our military people are too Western educated, not understanding or lack of communication with the China counterpart. What can be done to improve more cooperation and exchanges between military, the Navy, the Coast Guard between China and the Philippines on both sides?
Maybe I can start. I think between the two law enforcement agencies, we already have this a forum established in the year 2017, and we have already the joint committee of Coast Guard between China and the Philippines. And from 2017 to 2020, we exchanged visits 3-4 times, and the last time when I was here in 2020, and I think that March, it was the Chinese Coast Guard's first visit to Manila. And I think, and they conduct joint exercises in Manila in the port and in the near offshore. So I think that was a very good example of law enforcement agencies exchange and cooperation. But I haven't seen anything happening under this Marcos government administration. So I'm not sure whether we can continue this joint committee of law enforcement. And I sincerely hope that I can see, a future exchange of visits, joint exercises for each other to understand each other better. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe from our Philippine expert, what can we do to enhance promote cooperation and exchanges between the militaries of Philippines and China? What can be done?
It was upon the initiative of the Philippine Coast Guard and the Chinese Coast Guard to enter into a memorandum of agreement regarding maintaining communications and protocol in 2017. Unfortunately, under the Duterte administration, Secretary Locsin scrapped the agreement because he viewed it as a turf invasion of his turf, being the Foreign Relations Secretary at that time. But that was an unfortunate decision on the part of Locsin. So currently, there is no existing line of communication, a formal line of, I'm sure there's some line of communication, but there's no formal line of communication, which brings me back to the point that I raised yesterday about functional COCs. We need functional COCs that can be put in place immediately while we negotiate the broader framework COC. And these functional COCs can be along the lines of Coast Guard to Coast Guard, Fisheries Association to Fisheries Association, D8, Department of Agriculture and Fisheries with the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries of the other side, and down the line. Even with respect to energy, we can have the China National Offshore Oil Corporation and PNOC having some form of agreement when it comes to the allowing the passage of survey ships from outside of the South China Sea going to into the service contract areas on the shore of the Philippines. And these are undisputed service contract areas. And the entry of these survey vessels has been frozen because of the perception that if there are survey vessels coming into the Philippine shorelines, China will attack those surveys, which is, for me, quite ridiculous. So right now, we have a moratorium on oil and gas exploration in the West Philippine Sea, and that moratorium is a self-inflicted damage to the Philippines, which I don't understand why until now it's not being lifted.
You said the agreement was scrapped. Can anyone or any group in the government revive that one with China, the one that was scrapped? Can it be revived in a better way? Can you suggest?
I don't suppose
Coast Guard.
It was the DFA that scrapped the agreement between the two Coast Guards, and I think the initiative has to come from the DFA.
Yes. Yes. Mr. Ado Pagdinawan, question or comment?
We have a problem here, which is on the Philippine side, because to exacerbate matters in the Philippine Coast Guard, the Commandant, Admiral Abu, even appointed a spokesperson for the West Philippine Sea, who reports to media directly. And it's also perhaps an unfair observation, but it's becoming a perception that even our Secretary of National Defense is not reporting to the President, but to a foreign country. So to answer the question on whether leadership is involved here on our side, I'm sorry to say and admit this in front of our Chinese friends, that we have a lot to do, but Dr. Loha already admitted her exasperation along this matter. For instance, I appreciate the statement earlier of the Chinese panel that Taiwan is not a business of the Philippines. That is a bold statement that should reverberate in the ears of our media friends here. Taiwan is not a Philippine business. The US is an expert in building scenarios. And I am not personally convinced that the US will war in terms of a hot war, a shooting war versus China. It is my evaluation that the US is engaged in lawfare and information war. Why? Because after the Pelosi visit, realizing China's preparedness, the US withdrew all its assets to 3,000 kilometers from Taiwan. In other words, it ran with its tail between its legs, and it's not willing to risk an accident. So I read here that the motive behind the saber rattling is a dead herring or a diversion from an impending collapse of the US economy. The US is hiding from its own people its economic woes. And by way of diverting it, they go into a shooting war in Ukraine without boots on the ground, and is provoking these exacerbations and using the Philippines as a pawn, perhaps, for prepositioning, which may not even happen because maybe it's about time that it's announced here that there will be a challenge in the Supreme Court about the constitutionality not only of EDCA, but of the Visiting Forces Agreement and the Mutual Defense Treaty. Because precisely of Section 25, Article 18 of the Constitution, that any treaty existing after 1991 should be subject to Senate ratification and or referendum by the people and concurrence by the other state. The three agreements, the EDCA, the BFA, and the Mutual Defense Treaty, does not conform to this basic constitutional requirement. And how the Supreme Court overlooked that is again something that frustrates me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adolf Agdinawan. We'd like to pass on a question from Professor Bobby Tuason, watching us via Zoom and Facebook Live, University of the Philippines intellectual. Professor Bobby Tuason asked this question for the Chinese visitors and the Philippine intellectuals here. Question: a bilateral dialogue mechanism was forged between the Philippines and China in 2017 to resolve bilateral issues. Unfortunately, it hasn't been maximized after that. What happened? Can anyone here, or Dr. Loha, or anyone, or Victor General Corpus can explain why? Short answer lang kasi marami tanong pa.
I think Dr. Loha already answered that.
The bilateral dialogue mechanism. That is, but it said it has not been maximized now. Unfortunately, it has parang not really maximized. Professor Bobby Tuason's question, why?
Maybe I start?
Yes,
Shall
please.
start?
Why?
I think the BCM established since the year 2017 is a very big achievement between the two countries to consult about the South China Sea issue. It's a very important platform, and we conducted 6 meetings during the Duterte government. And also, I'm very happy to see the first one in the Marcos administration was happened, a week ago, when Chinese Vice Foreign Minister came here to Manila and conducted the 7th BCM in Manila. And I think that it's all confidential. So as a scholar, we didn't know what really happened during the talks. But
closed door.
Yes, it's all
that's
closed
why.
door. It's all closed door. But we do, have some information from the media report, both from China and also from the Philippines. We know that under this mechanism, we talk about, directly our differences, in the South China
yes,
Sea,
from
and also, both the differences and also the cooperation, especially maritime cooperation projects. So I think it's good for me to see that the BCM continues to work under this Marcos government. And I think that's very important. No matter what they're talking about, at least the mechanism continues to be here.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to a future, maybe more deepening consultation in using this platform.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Yes.
Not quite sure what kind of mechanism could be considered as useful or in this question. If you will expecting that this BCM will durable and resolve the questions or dispute between China and the Philippines in 1 minute, I think that's impossible for any of the regime or mechanism to do. But if you consider that this is a channel for China and Philippines to communicate with the common understandings about South China Sea, to understand each other's different position, and to control or manage the conflict, I think that's very useful for the two countries to keep the sustainability and peace of this region. So that's from different expectation. We can expect more than that. Thank you.
Thank you. There's another journalist commenting also. This type of conversation is also part of the improving dialogue between two countries to do away with misunderstandings and misconceptions. So 2 journalists said, we should have more of this. You should visit us more often. And maybe Philippine intellectuals could go there and have this type of discussions also with Dr. Loha and the others going there also. So it's very healthy to talk about these things.
Yes.
Do you have maybe 1 or 2 more last questions?
Yeah, well,
Yes.
mine is not a question, but I follow through.
Yes.
The group of Philippine think tank like ACP, SSRII, IDSI, Philippine-China Friendship Society, or the PCMCSI, we're now discussing, aside from filing a Supreme Court case questioning the whole gamut of security arrangements with the Americans, because this is a clear provision in the Constitution that 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines, Article 18, Section 25. You can read it yourself, our friends from media. It is very clear. After the expiration in 1991 of the agreement between the Republic of the Philippines and the USA concerning military bases, foreign military bases, troops or facilities shall not be allowed in the Philippines. After expiration in 1991, shall not be allowed in the Philippines except under treaty duly concurred in by the Senate and when the Congress so requires, ratified by a majority of votes cast by the people in a national referendum. Anyway, this will be brought to the Supreme Court. And secondly, on the day after Holy Week, we hope to have a media forum. We invite everybody at the Pandesal Forum again, because she's feeling bad that our forum today is not.
No, it's good. It's good. UP is good.
I was just joking.
UP is good. Thank
And
you, thank
but he brought pandesal here.
Yes, for all speakers and
But
journalists.
we are planning to launch a peace caravan from Manila to Cagayan Province and hold a rally in Cagayan Province to highlight these. Our oldest member is already nodding his head.
Yeah, he doesn't look old. There's a question.
So we are planning that 3-day or 4-day caravan to Cagayan Province, around the region and back to Manila. So
There's one more.
Make it early because
yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. There's one more question. Some journalists asking, is it true the Philippines is the only country in ASEAN, 10 countries, with the most security arrangement with the US and hosting foreign military bases? Is it true? This was mentioned by Professor Roland Simbulan last Friday. We are the most, and can we move towards the ASEAN non-aligned status somehow? Is there hope? Is there hope for the Philippines to be like a normal ASEAN country and not too tied up with any superpower against anyone?
Take down Marcos.
Is that possible? Is that wishful thinking? Professor Roland Simbulan mentioned we have the most security arrangement with the US, and yet we have the lousiest defense capability. He said, maybe it's a negative, he said.
Singapore has a similar security agreement with the United States, but Singapore adamantly refuses the prepositioning of weapons in its territory. And we understand that there are concerns being raised by ASEAN neighbors regarding the EDCA prepositioning provision. And I think that's the only thing that needs to be fixed with EDCA. The rest having been upheld by the Supreme Court, as a lawyer would respect that decision. But with respect to the need for the Philippine authority to object to certain types of weapons being prepositioned, that needs to be amended. Thank you.
That's very good point. Everybody saw you in the Senate mentioning that March 1. That's a very enlightening point. Any last question from our media friends? Maybe one or two more last questions. Yes. What are your hopes for Philippine-China relations? Maybe that last question for every one of you. Personal hope. I don't. Before that, somebody, a businessman asked, he said he is not an intellectual or a political writer, a businessman watching via Zoom. He said, why is it every time the media and the politicians talk about Philippines, China, it's always about islands and security and EDCA? Why, unlike other ASEAN countries, look at China as the world's #1 biggest consumer market? What can you recommend Philippines to export more to China? Since why is it the Philippines now look at China always as a security issue and not as the biggest potential market to enrich the Philippines? Any recommendation? What can we export more aside from bananas and durians? What can we do to sell more?
As experts focusing on South China's issue, I think we are, frankly speaking, we are tired of talking about the South China issue.
Yes.
As
Why
well
not
as the
bananas and durians and Boracay?
Yeah, I wish that China and the Philippines
Talking about
manage the dispute, the South China dispute very well,
and earn more money from its other.
So next time we come here, just talk about the cooperation and other things.
And tourism
and
durian.
people engagement. So, but I do have some suggestion for our Philippine friends that you guys should note down the news about the disputed issues in the South China Sea. We have disputes. There are several claimants in South China Sea. We all know that. Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, China, and but other countries in China, South China Sea, not a big issue, not a hot issue, not the top list of the news. But in Manila, it seems every day South China Sea occupy the top list of your medias. So yes, media can help make the public know more information, but more publicity and more hyping up will not make the situation work well. And we make the politicians less little room and space to communicate and negotiation. So that's a very sincerity suggestion for Philippine friends. And I also want to respond for the question about the compared with other member states. US has also bases in Thailand, in Singapore, but these bases, firstly, these bases are far away from China. And secondly, the Singapore and Thailand have very strict, very serious restrictions towards these bases using. Just as Dr. No has saying that you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that. In Thailand, if US wants to use the Thailand bases to attack China, no way. Singapore is almost the same. So what about the Philippines? It's just like the blank check, just let the US to fail. That's the differences.
Sure. I do agree with the chair and also Professor Hubo that I'm not tired of the South China Sea, the discussion, but honestly, I'm thinking maybe our next design or next topic, maybe we can talk about the connection between Bill program with BRI, because this year is the 10th anniversary of the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. So I think that we have the Bill program continues, and you can benefit a lot from the BRI. So that's maybe could be our next topic, how they can contribute to the future China-Philippine cooperation.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. I would just like to point which Taloha mentioned before. It seems to you it's the designation of what EDCA side is merely domestic issue of Filipinos, but but actually deploy a weapon in the Philippine territory is also domestic issue of Philippines. If you don't attack another country. So why China worries about that? I think from strategic point of view, it's quite clear. It's maybe you just designate our 3 or 4 new sites, but it looks for China for me it be a little bit like salami strategy and salami slice strategy. A little bit follow the step of United States step by step and go to the wrong direction, and it will how to say I will lead it to a way cannot be returned. That's what I want to respond the comments from Dr. Loha. And the second one I would like to mention, actually, in the moment, the essence of China-US rivalry actually has been fundamentally changed. For example, Chinese proposition of no conflict, no confrontation, mutual respect, win-win cooperation. Focus on cooperation, managing the difference has not been effective response from by the U.S. side. U.S. side defined the Sino-China relationship in the framework so-called competition and confrontation. So with respect, confrontation as essence and confrontation, cooperation is just a little bit like the temporary strategy, because US put into, for example, like the process of detangle economically, technologically, and in every area with the relation of in the relation with China. So if we find that the essence of China-US relation, look at the essence of China relations change significantly, we should not promote from Philippine side. We should not promote this kind of process. If you promote this kind of process, you will put yourself in very dangerous situation. That's my comment.
Okay, and I think this is very interesting question. Why every time we will think about the conflict or the disputes between China and Philippines, but to me, that if I just remember Philippines or mention the Philippines, I will remember the beach, sea, bananas, and durian, something like that. Just all my best memory here. And what I'm thinking is that, yes, China and Philippines have many disputes in the South China Seas, but in the world well, lots of the countries have the dispute with their neighbors, but they still need to coexist as neighbors. So I think we can look into the other side of the coin. Although China and the Philippines have the dispute over the South in the South China Sea, but we don't have conflict. We haven't had conflict yet. So that's the other side of the coin, is we control ourselves. We manage the conflict very well. So is that a very good news for both sides, for the bright side? So I think in media or social media or our social media, we can look the other side of this coin more often. When we have the bad news, we have dispute, but we can handle dispute all by ourselves, and maybe someday we will resolve that dispute. And today I'm very glad to hear some scholars have mentioned about the 5 principles peaceful coexistence, because it's already almost 70 years, right? And in 2014, I remember President Xi Jinping has elaborated that the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. And he said, quote, "The core of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence is that there is sovereignty, equality among all countries, and that no country should monopolize international affairs." Quote end. So I think it's very important for China and the Philippines. I think what we encounter is the question: if there's no country, we can let any of the country to monopolize the regional affairs by its own strategy and understanding of international law. That China and the Philippines will coexist and co-progress in the future. That's my answer to that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all those answers. Mr. Laurel would like to.
No, I think
comment?
Madam Anna Malindog from Beijing would
Yes,
like to thank
would like to make comments. Professor Anna Malindog, geopolitics expert. Maybe
Yes,
you would like to answer that question.
No, not necessarily, since we're ending.
We adjust the sound. Can we hear her, the sound? Bakit mute si Professor? Naka-mute
No,
ka?
I'm not muted.
While we're waiting, I'd like to mention that this morning, I was invited to a ceremony where the China ambassador and many business people went to the Chinese cemetery to offer annual tribute to the Filipino-Chinese martyrs who fought against Japanese invaders in the Philippines, for the Philippines, with the Philippines. Philippines and China were allies during World War II, World War and other eras. This morning. And not only Wachi is only one of 10 or 20 groups. Yes, you're correct. Wachi and others. Very touching ceremony this morning. The first time since the pandemic. Somebody also commented, another scholar via Zoom. He said, there's good news about Philippine-China relations because China has been doing well diplomatically in recent weeks with Honduras, with Brazil, with Saudi Arabia, Iran, and other countries. So the scholars are correct. China is focused on economy and trade. war is not their priority. That's a comment from the Zoom. So let us focus also on cooperation and trade with China and profit from our friendship. Yes.
Okay, while we're waiting for Madam Ana Malindog, yes,
Technical
I just
problem.
want to make this last. The Americans are really pushing the Philippines towards the precipice. And they're motivating the Philippines about the South China claim. South China Sea claim that maybe we can get all of it or get more or whatever, that we can win it. No, we will end up with zero, the way Ukraine is ending up. I think that's important to stress to our nation. And really the problem is go ahead. Yeah, okay, tapos na ako. Okay na.
Si Dr. Mendiza Loja maybe has a final point on cooperation between Philippines and China, the future.
I think I need to just mention history because maybe media people and the audience of Philippine media were born do not have memory of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And let me just recall what happened there.
1963.
Yes.
I think, wow.
Okay, the U.S. invaded Cuba, and this was the Bay of Pigs invasion. It was a U.S.-funded invasion of Cuba for the purpose of overthrowing the government and replacing it with a pro-U.S. government. Because of the invasion, Cuba invited the Soviet Union to install nuclear and conventional missiles in its territory. And the U.S. reacted by saying that this is a provocation. And Cuba responded and said that this is deterrence. Now, this is exactly the same reasoning being employed by the Philippine government in allowing U.S. weapons, the prepositioning of U.S. weapons in Philippine territory, that all this is a deterrence to China. But we have to remember what happened next. After Cuba explained to Kennedy that this was a deterrence to U.S. invasion, because there was another invasion about to be taking place, and this was the Mongoose operation. And the reaction of the U.S. was to say that, no, this is a violation of our Monroe Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine is an 1800s doctrine which states that the U.S. will not allow a regional power to rise anywhere else, and for any superpower to have a position, to have weapons inside its Western Hemisphere, which is the sphere of influence of the United States. And in reaction to the installation of Soviet missiles in Cuban territory, the U.S. launched a naval quarantine. It was not a naval blockade, it was a naval quarantine through which the U.S. would inspect vessels coming from Cuba or going to Cuba for purposes of identifying whether these vessels are carrying missiles. So in reaction to the move of the U.S., the Soviet Union said that a naval blockade is an act of war, and therefore we are about to go to a nuclear war with you. And the Soviet Union, of course, is a nuclear power, the same as the US. And poor Cuba had to be the site of a nuclear holocaust. And that could be the very same situation that the Philippines will find itself when the time comes that the US is about to preposition missiles in Philippine territory, and China would block the shipment of the deployment of these missiles. And therefore, we would now have a nuclear standoff similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis. That crisis was averted only through negotiation between Kennedy and Khrushchev. And what occurred after that was the withdrawal of Soviet missiles in Cuba, and this is not known very well by media or history students, the withdrawal of Jupiter missiles from Italy and Turkey in reciprocation to the withdrawal of Soviet missiles from Cuba. So we need to learn from history. It's not just Ukraine that teaches us that neutrality is vital to a bystander state in a great power war. Neutrality is vital, even way back in 1960s with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Look what happened to Cuba now. It's under comprehensive embargo until now. It's almost about what, 50 years? And
60.
it's
60 years.
economically, it's an economic cripple.
60
And what
years.
that the same thing can happen to the Philippines, especially if you have China being an ascendant trade and economic power in Asia and the world. The Philippines will be placed under economic sanctions for how many years? We will end up not just by the US. If it's a China-US war and China prevails, then we will end up being the economic cripple in Asia.
Thank you very much for the thought-provoking history crash course. Very, very enlightening. Even me, I thought I knew everything already. That was a very interesting reminder to all of us. Thank you, Dr. Melissa Loha. Professor Anna Malindog, are you okay? Can she speak? Wala na, wala. At meeting. While waiting for her, yes, her sound is okay. Are you muted? We could not hear you. Can you please unmute yourself? Thank you, Dr. Melissa Loha, for that reminder. We don't want the Philippines to be the 21st century Cuba. That's a very, very good analogy, very good warning.
Yes, can I be heard already?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, since we're already ending, I would like first to thank you, to extend my sincere thanks to everyone who are there on site. Also, our friends and colleagues, especially from the media and from different sectors, who are also online as part of the organizer of this roundtable discussion, the Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies. And also, I'm sorry I cannot be there. I'm now currently in Beijing, and also I'm in the university. But one thing that I would agree with Dr. Loha is what you call that countries like a country like the Philippines should pursue an independent foreign policy, because all of these discussions that we're hearing and we're talking about, one possible solution to that, or probably a response to that, is an independent foreign policy, which also means that it also means neutrality. But of course, it will depend, and it's in the hands of our president at the moment, because yun nga ang sinasabi natin lagi, the author of our foreign policy is the president. So I really hope that the current administration will consider this and reflect on this, because personally, I really don't think that we have an independent foreign policy at the moment. But I still hope that there's a long way to go, and our president is still new in office, and we can still discuss these issues, and I hope that we all contribute to understanding not only the issue but also the fact that the ASEAN region, or the Asia Pacific region, at the moment is relatively peaceful, and I really hope that peace will be sustained in the future, because what's going on right now when you talk about geopolitical tension is really heightened. And I think everyone in the room at the moment, and even across the world, there's only one thing that we want. We want peace, and we want economic development. So that's my very short intervention. And actually, I just want to quickly thank everyone, especially Kamentong, Joshua, and all of the organizers, and of course our Chinese colleagues for going to the Philippines, to Manila, to have that very candid, very open-minded, and very direct conversation and dialogue with our local counterparts, the Philippine intellectuals, and everyone who's there right now in the Zoom. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and good luck, and have a pleasant afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thoughts and analysis, Professor Anna Malindog, and to all the speakers from the Philippines and from our China delegation. We'd like to thank again, of course, our media friends who came here and asked questions. Also those via online Zoom and Facebook Live. Most especially, thank you to the South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative, SCSPI delegation from Beijing. representing different intellectual institutes. Professor Hubo.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
You guys can follow us on Twitter. We have Twitter account, yes.
We like
and
Twitter.
we also have a website. So we share the information directly to the public.
What is your Twitter name? It's the name South China Sea Strategic.
SCSPI. SCS. Yeah. Underscore.
Underscore.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So this will not be the last. We will have more of these exchanges. Thank you.
If you go to the SCS_PI, then you will see daily monitoring of ships.
You know all this.
Airplanes, violations of the Americans and so on.
Very good. So we could ask questions there.
Yeah, actually, very famous account on the Twitter. So you can search.
Very good.
You can search on Twitter. Website.
Thank you.
We don't know that here, but it's just there.
Thank you. Thank you once again to Professor Hubo, Dr. Yan Yan, Dr. Lei Xiaolu, Dr. Zheng Zhihua for coming here to candidly, frankly exchange ideas with our scholars, intellectuals, and our media friends. Thank you very much. We will promote cooperation, dialogue, and what Professor Loha just said and Ana Malindog, neutrality and non-aligned status, I think, is our ideal in the Philippines. Friends to all and enemies of no one. And somebody also text a message also, we should not forget the Philippines and China has more than 1,000 years of uninterrupted trade and friendship. Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. Oh nga, I brought the breads here. All of you, my breads and cookies by way of simple gift. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the, thank you. Thank you to General Victor Corpus, Mr. Laurel, Mr. Mao Samonte, who will soon have a book launching. Let us support the book launching. We will schedule it after the Holy Week because very hard to find people now.
The title of Mauro's book to be launched again is China, the Way, the Truth, and the Life.
We will prepare this very good book launching. Yes, we should all support Mr. Mauro's. Thank you. Thank you to all our media friends. Yes, can we have a group chat? Mr. Laurel, Mr. General Victor Corpus, can the scholars, Dr. Melissa Loha, can we have a picture, Dr. Pagdinawan? You stand in the middle and our friends can come here. You go to the middle also, General Corpus, since you're a legend. Yes. And the guests could sit. Can we ask the guests to sit because there's not enough space? There's not enough space. If you don't sit, no, if you don't sit, we cannot all fit in the picture. The photographers requesting that is your privilege as guests. You can sit. When we go to China, we sit. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Yes, yes. Can the scholars stand behind? Can we ask Mr. Mao Samonte in the middle? Professor, Mr. Mao Samonte. Mr. Mao Gia Samonte. By the way, to our guest, Mr. Samonte used to be a movie director also. Yes. Group pictures.
1, 2, more, 1, 2. Hi. Sir, guys, sir. Okay.
Uy, sama ka, RJ. Our activists from the consumer section, consumer sector.
Okay. 1, 2.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. After today, there will be holidays in the Philippines. 1 week. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.